So here's one for you. He wrote it on a bus when he was only 17 years old, and he had the perfect saxophone melody in his mind. It would actually become one of the most distinct saxophone melodies in history. Only he didn't play the saxophone, so he had to hum it. In fact, years later when he went to record it, he had one of the greatest producers in history helping him. He went through like 9 different saxophonists because they couldn't play exactly what he was humming. Against all odds, he decided to throw away the recording that he did with the legendary producer and just do it himself. To the chagrin of surrounding voices, he was right as rain though, because it became the #1 song in the middle of the 80s. The spectacular story's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you've ever held up an actual lighter at a live show, before cell phones took over, you're gonna dig this channel. Make sure that you subscribe below. Do that right now. Ring that bell so that you're always in the know on our latest interviews and videos. We also just released some new and exclusive videos on our Patreon. There you're gonna find more content and you can be a part of keeping this channel going as an honorary producer. All right, so it's time for another edition of our series, The New Standards. This is a show that, of course, takes an in-depth look into songs that transcend decade, genre, and fads. Songs that are monumental touchstones in our culture and our society. Previous episodes, we've covered a lot of them, but a couple examples, Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper. You will find me, time after time. Take On Me by Aha. Amongst others. Today we're covering the indisputable Wham / George Michael hit, Careless Whisper. From George's amazing vocal to the signature saxophone line. The story is just as good as the song. So childhood friends George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley created one of the most iconic pop bands of the 80s. Of course, they named the group Wham with an exclamation mark, a word that they felt represented the energy and the spirit and ambition of their friendship. Although Wham was only a unit for 3 studio albums over about 4 years. At their height in 84 and 85, they were one of the most popular British-based bands, selling over 30 million albums. As George would later sing in Freedom 90, they had every big shot, good time band on the run, boy. Even Duran Duran was shaking in their booties. The Wham duo first performed all together in a ska-flavored project that they called The Executive. This was in 1979. The Executive consisted of Andrew and George, along with Andrew's brother Paul, David Austin and Andrew Lever. Alas, The Executive soon crumbled. That opened the door for George and Andrew to officially form Wham. This happened in 1981. Their pursuit to become pop stars was relentless, and they pestered every A&R person in England to give them a shot. The tenacity finally paid off when Mark Dean signed the duo to his independent record label called Intervision, basically capitulating to their persistence, especially Andrew's constant badgering. He really helped him get there. Well, I haven't seen your face around town a while, so I greeted you with an annoying smile when I saw that. Dean finally agreed to a token recording deal for Wham, figuring that giving him a try would pose little financial risk to him and his label. So Wham dropped a few 12-inch singles. There was Wham Rap in early '82. Everybody take a look at me. I've got street credibility. I may not have a job, but I have. And then came the release of the single Young Guns' Go For It. That was in late '82. It was a song that George wrote about 2 partners in crime whose friendship was in danger of being disrupted thanks to a serious girlfriend who wanted her man to stay away from his troublemaking playmate. Saw that girl upon your arm and she won your heart with a fatal charm as a soul boy. Young Guns also features George Michael, the rapper, a vocal style that he discontinued after recording Wham's debut. Thankfully. I love George Michael, but not as a rapper. Young Guns was quietly going nowhere, though, till suddenly Wham got their huge break. They were invited to perform on the UK show Top of the Pops, thanks to another act dropping out of their slot. So George and Andrew made the most of this opportunity, and they killed it. The response to Wham's performance on Top of the Pops was frenetic, especially with teenage girls. Young Guns rocketed all the way to number 3. It was the tipping point that George and Andrew were really hoping for all those years. Screaming Wham mania had begun. The duo released their debut album Fantastic in '83. The LP yielded 4 top 10 hits in the UK, including a re-release of Wham Rap, which had failed to chart on its initial run. There was Young Guns, Bad Boys, and Club Tropicana. That one's a good song. That rounded out the rest of them. Firmly placing their flag in the 80s pop canon. After an unpleasant legal battle, Wham extricated themselves from Intervision, and they signed an international deal with Epic Records and a U.S. deal with Epic's sister label, Columbia Records. The respective deals gave Wham the major label promotion and distribution that they needed to achieve global superstardom. Wham's second album, Make It Big, got it right there, my copy from when I was a kid, that was released on November 5th, 1984 in the UK. Although not so big in terms of track count, it only had 8 songs. The album itself was massive in terms of popularity. Of course, thanks to the 4 heavyweight singles, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go,
Wake me up before you go, go, 'cause I'm not planning on go.
Freedom,
I don't need your freedom.
Everything She Wants,
Somebody tell me, oh,
and today's featured song, Careless Whisper.
careless whispers. Oh.
Make It Big was an instant classic and the first real evidence that George Michael was a top-notch pop craftsman. In the US, Make It Big reached gold on December 26, 1984, day after Christmas. It was platinum 2 days later. A year later, almost to the day, it tallied to 4 million in sales, well on its way to selling over 6 million in the US and over 10 million worldwide. Not surprisingly, the album went to number 1 on the Billboard Top 200 Albums chart. Worldwide phenomenon. It hit the top of the album charts in countries all around the world, from Australia to Canada to Japan to the UK. And a big part of that credit really has to go to Careless Whisper. Careless Whisper is just one of the smoothest, most soulful and seductive love songs ever recorded. A fact made even more incredible since he wrote it when he was only 17 years old. I'll say that there are a lot of urban legends and different takes on the creation of this song, so I'll give a few different positions, a few different views based on interviews over the years. So George has said that he was on his way to a DJ gig when he wrote the song. Different interview though, he said that he was on his way to the movie theater where he worked as an usher. Hence where the line calls to mind the silver screen and all its sad goodbyes. That's where that line came from. I mean, who knows? It was one or the other, but George would go on to say, and I quote, "I've always written on buses, trains, and in cars. These days it's in planes. It's always happening on journeys. I remember exactly where it happened, where I was sitting on the bus, how I continued, and everything. I remember I was handing the money over to the guy on the bus, and I got this line, the sax line. And then he moved away, and I continued writing it in my head. After that, he worked on it for about 3 months, continuing to write it inside of his head. Although the majority of Wham's songs were written by George Michael, as we know, Andrew Ridgeley gets some credit for Careless Whisper as well. Andrew actually helped George to finish it. As the story goes, George told Andrew one day that he had this great melodic line, but he didn't know if it should be a saxophone line or a vocal line. After hearing George sing it, Andrew said, "That really sounds like it goes with these chords that I've got." As it turns out, Andrew had these 4 chords on the guitar that he didn't really know what to do with. Looking at him, a little surprised, really, George agreed that it was the perfect fit. Perhaps it was an extraordinary coincidence, but I think it was fate. These 2 completely separate ideas came together to create the masterpiece we know as Careless Whisper. After that, the pair slowly figured out the verses and the choruses and the lyrics and the rest of the nuances, and that happened over the next few months. Truth be told, George pretty much had the song written as far as the melody and the lyrics go, along with that sax line. And the only thing you can copyright on a song are the lyrics and the melody. But as the story goes, George gave a full 50% writing credit to Andrew Ridgeley, knowing that when it did become a hit, Andrew would be financially secure for life. It's very, very cool. Although Careless Whisper was never a favorite of George Michael's, he knew it would be a hit if it got a shot. He got a taste of that in the experience I'll share next, but first I do want to thank our sponsor Zenni Eyewear, the glasses that I always wear. Make sure to take some time and shop at Zenni.com, their latest frames and styles and colors, where you can get a brand new pair of glasses for less than a vinyl record. $6.95 is where they start, actually. Okay, he knew it would be a hit, and here's kind of an example. This is really cool. So during his last night working as a DJ, George played the demo of Careless Whisper for an unsuspecting audience. He didn't really care if he got in trouble since he'd already given his notice. He was going to quit anyway. He played Careless Whisper at the end of the night, and the dance floor filled up as a result. People really, really liked this song. And I'm never gonna dance again. Got 2 feet, I've got no... George remembered thinking that a really good sign and that he was right. What a great opportunity for him to try out his song. That's very cool. George and Andrew have given separate accounts of the story behind Careless Whisper's lyrics, and they both largely agree with one another. Drawing from both of them, this is what they said. So I guess when George was about 12 or it might have been 13, he used to have to chaperone his sister, who was full 2 years older. I did this at an ice rink at Queensway in London. During these visits, George met a blonde-haired girl whose name was Jane. He had a big crush on her, but he didn't stand a chance. Back then, he was still struggling with his looks and his self-confidence. He was kind of in an awkward stage, and she hardly knew he existed. But he spent a lot of afternoons longing for this girl. So fast forward a few years later to age 16, George had grown out of the awkward phase, and he was starting to become a little bit popular. He was also in his first relationship with a girl named Helen. Now, around that time, Jane had moved in just around the corner from George's school, and although he immediately recognized Jane, she had no idea who he was because he changed so much. When George played a school disco with the executive, his old band, she saw him singing and she took a liking to him. Afterwards, they started seeing each other. However, George hadn't broken things off with Helen at this point, and neither girl knew about the other. Said George about it, "I thought I was being smart. I had gone from being a total loser to being a two-timer." The whole idea of Careless Whisper was the first girl finding out about the second, which she never did in real life. But I started another relationship with a girl called Alexis without finishing the one with Jane. It all got a bit complicated. Jane found out about her. She got rid of me. The whole time I thought I was being really cool, I did feel guilty about the first girl, and I've seen her since, and the idea of the song was about her. They went on to say, Careless Whisper was us dancing because we danced a lot, and the idea was we're dancing, but she knows. And it's finished. So good together, we could have lived this dance forever. Eventually, George confessed to Helen, and his remorse helped him to craft the lyrics to Careless Whisper. Andrew, for his part, called it a tale about a cheating lover who was hemmed in by guilt. Its lyrics are imbued with deep emotion and deep regret. When it came time to record Careless Whisper, though, went through at least 2 rounds of production that we know of. Now, for the first round, George Michael made a trip to the legendary Muscle Shoals Sound Studio in Alabama. This was in 1983. And there he worked with the legendary producer Jerry Wexler, who produced everybody from Led Zeppelin to Aretha Franklin to Ray Charles to Bob Dylan. But in a stunning development, George went against the grain, and he scrapped his work with Wexler He was ultimately unhappy with the result, and he later re-recorded and produced the song himself at a lesser studio in London. And it was this second version that would be released as the single.
To the heart and mind, ignorance is kind.
But maybe the most noteworthy part of the recording process was how they were able to nail down that legendary saxophone line. Now, initially, when George was recording with Jerry Wexler, the producer booked a top saxophone player to fly in from LA. But incredibly, after 2 hours of blowing, of trying on the sax, George Michael was not at all satisfied. Although he appeared to be playing the part perfectly, George kept saying, no, still not right. Then he would lower his head to the talkback mic and he would patiently hum that part to him yet again. It has to twitch upwards a little just there, see? Not too much. Ultimately, the sax player couldn't do it to George's liking and he left the studio pretty humiliated. After that, another top sax player arrived, this time from New York City, and again, George went through the drill, humming the piece through the talkback. But yet again, it was the same result. It sounded right to everyone in the room, including legendary Jerry Wexler, but not to George Michael. In fact, 9 different sax players were brought in, but no one could do it to George's liking. Finally, they called in George's friend who would play the original sax demo. Now, there's a couple different stories about this, but a lesser-known player named Steve Gregory, and when Steve arrived at the studio, it took him just one take. It was perfect. So years later, George Michael would claim that he got more compliments on writing that sax solo in his head than on anything else he'd ever written. Here's the thing. Most young rookie musicians would have taken the advice of one of the gold standard producers of all time. I mean, Jerry Wexler is one of the best ever. They would have stepped aside and let him take the reins. But that's what made George Michael such a master. Uncompromising excellence. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he made it a reality no matter what, no matter the cost. Now, reflecting on Careless Whisper overall, George would say, I'm still a bit puzzled why it's made such an impression on so many people. Is it because so many people have cheated on their partners? Is that why they connect with it? I have no idea. But it's ironic that this song, which has come to define me in some way, should have been written right at the beginning of my career when I was still so young. I was only 17 and I didn't really know much about anything. Certainly nothing much about relationships. Of course, we all know that George was gay and these were relationships with women that he was writing about. It's very interesting. Careless Whisper, of course, went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It went to #1 on the Adult Contemporary chart. It went to #3 on the Hot Dance Singles chart. Triple threat there. Actually, it was also the #1 song on Billboard's 1985 year-end chart. It beat out Madonna's Like a Virgin that was at #2. His own song, his other smash hit, Wake Me Up Before You Go, which was at #3. Internationally, Careless Whisper reached #11 in Spain, #10 in Hungary, #4 in Israel, #3 in France and West Germany and New Zealand. It went to #2 in Sweden, in Portugal, Norway, Austria, Belgium, and Finland. And then went to #1 in Iceland, Australia, Netherlands, Italy, Ireland, South Africa, Switzerland, and of course the UK. Since then, Careless Whisper has appeared in a lot of movies and TV shows. There was Knight Rider in '85.
Harley, I didn't expect you until...
I have to talk to you. It's important.
The Night at the Roxbury in '98. Bird Rock from the Sun in '99. Takes Two in 2007. Baby Mon in 2008.
Though it's easy to pretend, I know you're not a fool.
The In-Betweeners, 90210, Hot Tub Time Machine. Blended, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Deadpool.
I'm never gonna dance again the way I dance with you.
Two Broke Girls, Fresh Off the Boat, and Watchmen, just to name a few. Careless Whisper has also been covered by a variety of artists. In 1986, George Michael teamed up with Smokey Robinson. Bananarama covered it in 2001. Modest Mouse also did it then. Kenny G. Incubus. Barry Manilow.
The careless whispers of a
Brian McKnight.
I'm never gonna dance again.
Ben Folds did it with Rufus Wainwright. Jason Mraz did it. To Tori Amos.
It's easy to pretend
Brain.
Dance again the way I dance with you.
Kelly Clarkson just did it just recently. Careless Whisper has also been covered multiple times by Howard Jones. And Panic at the Disco. And of course, last but certainly not least, no one can deny the work of the sexy sax man who has changed the world with his constant playing of this song. My favorite part is when he's being arrested and the people there are like, they don't like George Michael. They don't like George Michael. It's hilarious.
You don't like George Michael? He doesn't like George Michael? He doesn't like George Michael!
Considering the youthful subjects of their songs and George's desire to create more sophisticated music, it's not surprising that Wham came to an end. Ridgeley acknowledged that Wham was not intended to mature in theme and style. It was young and fun. In his words, Wham would never be middle-aged. Ridgeley was also honest about George being the superior songwriter. He knew it was time for his partner to move on to realize his full potential. Of course, when George Michael did, his solo career skyrocketed. Said George about it, after Wham, after we split, everyone expected better things from me. I don't regret the breakup. I had prepared myself for the fact that Wham was going to end. For the last couple of years, Wham was very much my venture anyway, so it wasn't so frightening. George and Andrew did remain very close friends right up to George's sad passing in 2016. After the breakup of Wham, Andrew moved to Monaco and he did some motor racing. Then he moved to LA to pursue acting and singing opportunities. However, the LA experience proved to be not so good for Andrew, and he moved back to England in 1990. And that same year, Andrew began a long relationship with Kieran Woodward from Bananarama. They did separate in 2017, but happily reunited in 2019. That's always great to hear. Andrew stays busy riding and cycling and doing charity work for which he is very passionate about. As for the incomparable George Michael, as many of you know, I love George Michael. I mean, his death affected me in a way I just can't put into words. In my opinion, he's on a very short list of megastars that are some of the greatest of all time. He could write great songs, and he was also one of the biggest stars ever. I mean, he's the only guy that could compete at his peak with Michael Jackson and Prince and Madonna. He was the guy. He was one of the big four. When I first started doing Professor of Rock, I actually wrote down a list of about 15 people that I wanted to interview, my dream list before I leave this earth. And George Michael was near the top. In fact, my business partner was in touch with his manager about setting up an interview a few months before he passed. It's just so sad.
Goodbye.
George Michael, he's just one of a kind. Amongst all of the number one hits, the top 10 hits, the iconic albums, Faith and Listen Without Prejudice, and his icon status. He was one of the greatest producers of his time, a credit that he never gets, but he's very deserving of. Careless Whisper might be his best. And to think it all came while taking public transportation at the young age of 17. Leave us a comment about George Michael, Wham, and Careless Whisper. What do you remember about this song? What do you remember about the year 1985 and those songs that I mentioned? What are your thoughts about George as a producer, as a songwriter? And Careless Whisper, the sax line, is it the greatest of all time? Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe to be a part of this community going forward. It's all about keeping the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.